Hello there, and thank you for joining us. Coming up next in our World News program. President of the European Commission announced that Brussels proposes to stop European imports of Russian oil within 6 months. Millions of women across the U.S. could soon lose their legal right to abortion, according to a leaked Supreme Court document. And later in our news, South Korea and Japan claim North Korea fired a ballistic missile toward the sea off its east coast on Wednesday. The Director General of UNESCO said the protection of journalists concerns the whole society after the surge of violence against journalists occurred in Mexico. Hello again, those were today's top stories. And first off, in our news, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced Wednesday that Brussels proposes to stop European imports of Russian oil within 6 months and to exclude the largest Russian bank, Sberbank, from the international financial system, SWIFT. Hossein Berkan reports.
Moscow's economy received a new attack as the European Union, which relies heavily on Russian energy, is planning to phase out Russian deliveries of crude oil within 6 months and refined products by the end of the year, as part of a 6 sanctions package against Moscow aimed at cutting off funding of war against Ukraine, as described by Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission.
So today we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe. This will be a complete import ban on all Russian oil, seaborne and pipeline, crude and refined. We will make sure that we phase out Russian oil in an orderly fashion.
Brussels is also proposing to exclude 3 additional Russian banks from the SWIFT international financial system, including Sberbank, which is by far the largest institution in the country as it covers about a third of the banking sector. As part of the European Union sanctions, 7 Russian institutions were deprived of access to SWIFT, a secure messaging platform allowing crucial operations such as the transit of payment orders and funds transfer orders between banks.
We finally de-SWIFT Sberbank. Sberbank is the largest Russian bank. It holds round about 37% of the whole banking sector. And we will also de-SWIFT 2 other major banks in Russia. By that, we hit banks that are systemically critical to the Russian financial system and Putin's ability to wage destruction.
Coinciding with the World Press Freedom Day, the Commission is proposing to block access to the European airwaves to 3 major Russian state broadcasters, which would be prohibited from distributing their content in the European Union by cable, satellites, internet, or smartphone applications.
And when asked about this development of stopping European imports of Russian oil, Michael Rochlitz, professor of institutional economics, University of Bremen, had this to say later on in our program.
The sanctions that were imposed in February were unprecedented in their scale, in their scope, and also in the massive damage that they're already inflicting on the Russian economy and that they're going to inflict on the Russian economy in the future. And it is probably certain that Putin didn't really expect such massive sanctions to be imposed on Russia. The problem that Europe is facing and the Western nations are facing, that they can't really intervene directly into the conflict to protect Ukraine against Russia. And so the only real tool that they have at hand is economic sanctions. And at Russia is, as you mentioned at the beginning of this show, is escalating its attacks not only on the Ukrainian military but also on Ukrainian infrastructure. They started to attack railroads, bridges, hospitals, schools, all kinds of also civilian infrastructure. The only real possibility for the West to retaliate are increased additional economic sanctions. And the 2 most important sanctions here that remain, that haven't yet been imposed, are is an embargo on imports of Russian oil and gas. Oil is probably still a bit easier to implement than gas because, especially I'm from Germany at the University of Bremen in northern Germany, and Germany depends heavily still on imports of Russian gas. Oil is a bit easier, but it's also going to be painful.
That was Michael Rochlitz earlier in our special coverage. Now moving on, evacuees from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol arrived in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia after weeks of Russian shelling. The evacuation is the latest success of the Safe Passage operation coordinated by the UN and ICRC, which began on April 29th. That operation liberated 101 women, men, children and elderly people who had been living in bunkers for more than 2 months, while their city was being bombed by Russian forces. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky promised to continue his efforts to evacuate the residents of Mariupol in his evening address. Let's listen.
We will continue to do everything in our power to get all our fellow citizens out of Mariupol and Azovstal, with no doubt. It's hard, but we need everyone who is staying there, civilian and military.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced renewed bombing of the Azovstal steel complex in Mariupol, Ukraine, while people are still trapped there. Blinken affirmed that the humanitarian corridors that allow people to exit have not held up because Russia has not abided by the commitments that it made.
Mariupol is front and center in the news for so many people. It continues to be contested. And simply put, people need to be allowed out. We've seen efforts over the last couple of months to have humanitarian corridors to allow people to exit. In virtually every instance, those corridors have not held up because Russia has not abided by the commitments that it made. Now we just
Relatives of Ukrainian fighters from the Azov regiment surrounded by the Russian army in Azovstal factory in the besieged city of Mariupol gathered in the center of Kiev to ask the international community for help. The families described the Azov fighters as living heroes that should be saved from the hell they are living.
They have to be heroes, but only living heroes. We have to get them out of there. I hope all the media, foreign and domestic, will help. That's all I want.
My brother is a fighter from the Azov regiment. We talk to each other once a week. All he says is that everything is fine, but they don't know how long they can last. They desperately need help.
American President Joe Biden asked the U.S. Congress to quickly release a huge budget extension to continue delivering to Ukraine the military assistance that allows it to ridicule the Russian army by visiting a production site of Javelin missile launchers. Let's take a listen.
These weapons touched by the hands, your hands, are in the hands of Ukrainian heroes, making a significant difference. That's something each and every day you could and should be proud of. And I'm once more urging Congress to quickly pass this supplemental funding bill, over $300 billion, to help the Ukrainians, so they can keep all of you very busy for a while here.
Pope Francis has said he offered to travel to Moscow to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in an effort to stop the war in Ukraine, but has yet received a reply. The Pope also told the Italian daily Corriere della Sera that Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church, who has given the war his backing, cannot become Putin's altar boy. Francis told the newspaper that about 3 weeks into the war, he asked the Vatican's top diplomat to send a message to Putin about setting up a meeting. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi called for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine during a 2-day visit to Denmark, where he met with his Danish counterpart Mette Frederiksen, who said she hoped India will influence Russia. The two heads of government discussed the ecological strategic partnership and geopolitical issues. Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised on Tuesday in a speech delivered by video conference to the Ukrainian parliament that the United Kingdom will increase its military aid to Ukraine in the face of the Russian special operation with radars and drones, as well as continue so that no one dares to attack the country again. London had already released £450 million of military aid to Kiev since the beginning of the special military operation.
I can announce today from the UK government a new package of support totalling £300 million, including radars to pinpoint the artillery bombarding your cities, heavy lift drones to supply your forces, and thousands of night vision devices. We will carry on supplying Ukraine alongside your other friends with weapons, with funding and humanitarian aid until we have achieved our long-term goal, which must be so to fortify Ukraine that no one will ever dare attack you again.
At a meeting of the heads of diplomacy of Central America, the Caribbean and the European Union in Panama City, Panamanian Foreign Minister Erika Moines said that Central America and the Caribbean is the most vulnerable sub-region in the Americas to rising food prices caused by Russian special military operation in Ukraine, as it imports almost all the grain it consumes from both countries.
The consequences of war in Ukraine, which have already reached us, will continue whether or not the flag of peace is raised in this region. The price of basic agricultural products has increased and will continue to increase due to reduced supply, mainly of wheat and fertilizers, and the closure of key ports for their trade in the Black Sea. The Caribbean, together with Central America, is the most vulnerable sub-region in the hemisphere of the Americas to rise in international prices, including for food, because we import almost all the cereals that we consume.
Millions of women across the U.S. could soon lose their legal right to abortion, according to a leaked Supreme Court document. Miriam Zian has more in what follows.
The U.S. was shaken earlier this week by the news that Roe v. Wade, the ruling that legalized abortion in the U.S., could be overturned. Pro- and anti-abortion protesters gathered outside the Supreme Court in Washington after the draft opinion was released. Some shouted abortion is violence and oppression, while others chanted abortion is healthcare.
Over half the states in the U.S. will immediately ban access to safe and legal abortion, so people will be pushed into less safe alternatives. And access to abortion services saves lives. I know it saved mine.
We're happy. I mean, it's a good news. We've been praying for this. And we felt in our heart that, yes, Roe was going to be overturned this year.
Top officials expressed their disagreement with the draft, saying that women's rights are under threat in the U.S.
Women's rights in America are under attack.
If the rationale of the decision as released were to be sustained, a whole range of rights are in question. A whole range of rights. And the idea we're letting the states make those decisions, localities make those decisions, would be a fundamental shift in what we've done. So it goes far beyond, in my view.
Reproductive rights have been increasingly under threat in the United States in recent months as states have moved to tighten restrictions. Right-wing politicians have launched an assault on abortion, with Democrats fighting back to protect access to the procedure. The majority opinion will not be final until it is released by the court. But the ruling could lead to abortion bans in half of the states, leading millions of American women to lose access to abortion.
South Korea and Japan claimed North Korea fired a ballistic missile toward the sea off its east coast on Wednesday, less than a week after Pyongyang pledged to build its nuclear weapons at the fastest possible speed. The North's 14th documented weapons test this year takes place just days before Yoon Suk-yeol, the South's incoming president, takes office on May the 10th. South Korea and Japan have also criticized North Korea's recent actions, claiming that missile launches endanger regional and world security. MPs in Democratic Republic of Congo have voted to extend the state of siege in two eastern provinces after thousands of people killed due to the conflict the country between different rebels groups operating in the east and the Congolese army. The latter is supported by Ugandan army forces and UN peacekeeping mission to stabilize the region where millions of people have witnessed the surge of violence and hopeless efforts to curb the violence. Almost 193 million people across the world don't have enough to eat each day, according to a new report by the United Nations. It is also said that the number of people experiencing food insecurity has increased by 40 million in 1 year, and that is had worsened in 53 countries, with the report blaming climate change, wars, and the COVID-19 pandemic. The UN said acute hunger has risen in the last 6 years, and with major food crises at an all-time high, especially in countries which have been experiencing protracted conflicts. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for a safe return of displaced people to Nigeria during his visit to the Western countries, including Mali, Niger, where the conflict has been raging for a decade. Islam said in the following.
On the fourth day of a journey to West Africa postponed due to the Ukraine situation, UN Chief Antonio Guterres visited displaced individuals and refugees from Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso in a school courtyard at the camp southwest of Niger on Tuesday, whom he described as populations martyred by rebels' violence in the Sahel region, which is also facing drought and the effects of climate change.
Of course the conditions are not good. And that is why it is so wise, the policy to say, let's do what we have to do about humanitarian support to these camps, but let's try to find a solution for people.
Guterres appealed for humanitarian and military aid for the poor country, which is battling rebels' violence.
The best thing we can do for peace is to reintegrate those that in a moment of despair became terrorists but want to become now citizens and to contribute to the well-being of their brothers and sisters.
He also appealed for help for the Nigerian people and refugees, providing resources that open the way for schools and hospitals for everyone.
Yes, solution is to create the conditions, the security conditions, the development conditions for them to be able to go back home in safety and dignity.
Thousands of people have perished and over 2 million have left their homes in 3 of the world's poorest countries. According to UN figures, Niger has around 250,000 of internally displaced people, in addition to 264,000 Nigerian and Malian refugees and 13,000 from Burkina Faso.
Haitians fled their houses in the capital, Port-au-Prince, as gunfighting erupted between rival gangs, which left at least 20 people dead last week. Gunfire rang out on Monday afternoon in the poor neighborhood of Cité Soleil, where many frightened residents left homes and were running in all directions. On the occasion of the UNESCO World Conference on the International Press Freedom Day on Tuesday, Audrey Azoulay, the Director General of UNESCO, said that protection of journalists concerns the whole society after the surge of violence against journalists occurred in Mexico, one of the world's deadliest countries for this profession.
Les journalistes, notamment ukrainiens,
Journalists, especially Ukrainian journalists, overnight became war journalists. They were not prepared for it. They were not trained there. So we had a whole action to try to support both their training and their equipment. It concerns society as a whole, including governments that must help with these protection mechanisms, but it also concerns citizens who must mobilize to understand that this freedom of journalists is theirs, the ability to have access to fair information and independent information.
Thai researchers have determined that more than 70 shells lodged in a walkway outside Bangkok shopping mall are the relics of marine animals that lived more than 66 million years ago. The snail-shaped fossils, measuring up to 12 centimeters wide, were discovered by an observant shopper along sidewalk near the Siam Square shopping complex in a popular tourist area in Bangkok. And finally, to sports news now, Sadio Mane grabbed the winner as Liverpool hit back from 2 down to book their place in the 2022 Champions League final, following a roller-coaster 3-2 victory at 10-men Villarreal. The Senegalese forward notched his 21st goal of the season on 74th minute to cap a remarkable turnaround after Unai Emery's men had threatened a stunning comeback from the 2-0 first leg defeat at Anfield. And here is a reminder of our today's top stories. President of the European Commission announced that Brussels proposes to stop European imports of Russian oil within 6 months. Millions of women across the U.S. could soon lose their legal right to abortion, according to a leaked Supreme Court document. You also watched in our news, South Korea and Japan claimed North Korea fired a ballistic missile toward the sea off its east coast on Wednesday. Also, finally, you follow. The Director General of UNESCO said that protection of journalists concerns the whole society after the surge of violence against journalists occurred in Mexico. Well, that's the end of our program. Thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.